Commercial flights out of Kabul canceled amidst chaos at the airport as thousands try to flee the Afghan capital following the Taliban takeover. Also coming up in the program, governments move to evacuate their diplomats in haste, with several deciding to temporarily shutter their embassies in the Afghan capital. And the death toll from Saturday's earthquake in Haiti nears 1,300. Rescue workers racing to find survivors amid fears efforts may be hampered by a major storm. And those are your headlines here on France 24 with me, Claire Rush. Commercial flights out of Kabul have been canceled following hours of frantic scenes at Hamid Karzai International Airport. Thousands of people have been crowding the terminal and rushing the tarmac, hoping to flee the Afghan capital after its fall to the Taliban. A chaotic situation that prompted the U.S. military to fire shots into the air in a bid to control the crowd. International diplomats have also been heading to the airport for frenzied evacuations. Fraser Jackson and Selena Sykes report.
As the Taliban moved into Kabul, foreign diplomats scrambled to evacuate the country. Saudi Arabia, the US, the EU and some of its member states shuttered their missions and started airlifting personnel out. While Joe Biden watched on from Camp David, the US government issued a joint statement along with more than 60 countries, calling for calm and the safe departure of foreign nationals and Afghans who want to leave.
The Afghan people deserve to live in safety, security and dignity. We in the international community stand ready to assist them.
Not all countries are in a rush to evacuate. Russia has taken the Taliban at their word that they will guarantee the safety of foreign embassies. Turkey, too, said its operations would continue. As Afghans fled their homes, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan called on Pakistan to help stabilize the region to stem the flow of migrants making their way from Iran.
Son dönemde çatışmaların yoğunlaştığı Afganistan'a barış ve istikrarın gelmesi konusunda da Pakistan'a hayati görevler düşüyor.
As the Taliban regain power in the country, many are concerned about women's rights sliding backwards. Among them, Nobel Peace Prize laureate Malala Yousafzai, who called for immediate ceasefire and aid and protection for refugees and civilians. The UN Security Council is discussing the situation in Afghanistan on Monday, while French President Emmanuel Macron is to make an address following an Emergency Defense Council meeting.
And after taking control of the Afghan capital Kabul on Sunday, the Taliban are patrolling the streets, including the Green Zone, the formerly heavily fortified district housing most embassies and international organizations. With the Afghan government now collapsed, the insurgents say they're looking to provide for the population.
In the past, we didn't have as much responsibility as we do today, because now we are all being tested by God. Every day we will get involved to serve our nation and to provide the people with security and hope for their future.
In a bid to manage a peaceful transfer of power with the Taliban, former Afghan President Hamid Karzai said he hopes to hold talks with the insurgents. In a video uploaded to Facebook on Sunday, Karzai called for a dialogue and urged the Taliban to act with restraint.
بخير وفراغ وطريق الصلح ومذاكرات الصلح حل شود از نیروهای امنیتی و از نیروهای تحریک اسلامی طالبان می‌خواهیم که در هر جایی که هستند امنیت جان و مال مردم نگاه کنند.
The Taliban are now back in power in Afghanistan 20 years after being ousted by the U.S. Lauren Bersasher takes a closer look at who the insurgents are.
The Taliban were founded in the early 90s following the withdrawal of Soviet troops from Afghanistan. Initially based in Pakistan, the group quickly expanded its influence through Afghanistan. In 1996, it seized the capital Kabul, overthrowing the government, and by 1998 it controlled over 90% of the country. The Taliban preached a hardline form of Sunni Islam and Sharia law. Men were forced to grow beards and women to wear burqas. Cinema and music were banned, and girls prevented from going to school. Public floggings, amputations, and executions were also legion. After the 2001 World Trade Center attacks, the Taliban were accused of providing sanctuary for al-Qaeda's Osama bin Laden, and in October of that year, a US-led military coalition invaded Afghanistan. By December 2001, the Taliban regime had collapsed, yet many senior figures managed to escape and seek refuge in neighboring Pakistan. Over the next decade, the group continued to carry out attacks in Afghanistan despite several leadership changes, and in 2016 it recaptured its first provincial capital, the strategic city of Kunduz. The Taliban also ramped up their diplomatic efforts and entered direct negotiations with the US for the first time in 2018. The talks culminated in a February 2020 peace deal between the two sides, but the agreement failed to curb the violence as Taliban fighters launched a series of targeted assassinations against judges, journalists, and activists. After Joe Biden announced the complete withdrawal of US troops in April 2021, the group began seizing large swathes of territory while encountering little resistance from the Afghan military. In August 2021, the Taliban recaptured Kabul, nearly 20 years after they were last ousted from the capital.
Now, for more analysis on the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan, I'm joined here in the studio by Armin Georgian, France 24's international affairs editor. Thanks for joining us here in the studio, Armin. How did things in Afghanistan go so wrong so quickly?
Well, I suppose this is the question that many world powers are asking. How could the United States have miscalculated so incredibly badly in a country where they had spent 20 years? They should have had better intelligence. Or was it that actually the intelligence was right and President Biden ignored it? Either conclusion is obviously pretty frightening. But let's take a quick listen to President Biden speaking in early July, predicting that what has just happened would not happen.
But the likelihood there's going to be the Taliban overrunning everything and owning the whole country is highly unlikely.
Well, obviously the buck stops with Joe Biden. Yes, President Trump did announce the U.S. troop withdrawal, but it was Biden's choice to continue with that. And crucially, it was his choice to not change direction when he could see that things were not going according to plan, that the Taliban were making early successes. He could still have shown some flexibility at that point and decided to keep perhaps some US special forces in the country. But I suppose, Claire, the point of no return really was early July when it was announced that all US and NATO troops had left Bagram Air Base, the biggest air base in the country. After that, it was essentially game over.
Yes, because many Pentagon officials had estimated that a Taliban takeover could eventually happen, but in months, not just weeks. So this was even faster than some of the expectations at some of the highest levels of the government in the U.S.
Yeah, I mean, but like I said, either the intelligence was wrong, or which is in itself is pretty amazing considering the U.S. presence there for 20 years, or the intelligence was ignored. So neither of those conclusions are reassuring. I think in terms of the signal that this sends, Claire, to particularly America's rivals, this is a very significant thing, because if you think of why did President Biden end this war in Afghanistan or end the US involvement, it was so that he could focus on China. And his whole idea when he came into the White House was, wrap up these other foreign entanglements and focus on the strategic competition with China. So what does this disaster send to Beijing as a signal? Well, one signal that it could send is that the US is now so war-weary that it probably won't it probably won't put up a fight in the South China Sea or if there's a confrontation with Taiwan. And also, I think this disaster allows China to say to US allies in Asia, look, you might think you've got US security guarantees, South Korea, the Philippines, whatever, but actually look at what happened to the Afghans. They thought that they were that those guarantees were going to be fulfilled, but you can see from what happened in Afghanistan, the US can't be trusted, so don't even bother with that. Try and do a deal with us, the Chinese directly trying to come to an accommodation with us. You'll be better off in the long run. So I think this disaster in Afghanistan does provide a bit of grist to the mill of that Chinese narrative in Asia.
So it provides U.S. rivals with leverage and also prompting concern amongst U.S. allies themselves.
Well, there is this whole, of course, absolutely, concern amongst U.S. allies, and in a way, boosting, at least according to Beijing's and Moscow's view of the world, that their view of what the world order should be is more effective. This disaster will allow Russia and China to say, look, the West is constantly messing these interventions up, whether it's Libya or Iraq or Syria and now Afghanistan, that this model of intervention plus human rights and democracy, it ends in catastrophe of one sort or another. This is another example of that. Instead, what you other countries should sign up to is, Russian and Chinese version of the world order, which is we don't intervene with your internal affairs. We don't criticize your internal affairs. We have a pragmatic, business-like relationship with you, whatever your democratic standards are. That, I think, is going to be a way for this disaster will be a way for Beijing and Moscow to reinforce that narrative.
All right. Well, thank you for that analysis, Armin Georgian, France 24's international affairs editor. Moving on now to another one of our top stories. The death toll from an earthquake in Haiti has soared to nearly 1,300, according to the country's civil protection agency. Thousands more are injured and now homeless. Rescue workers are racing to find survivors buried in the rubble amid fears a major storm could bring heavy rainfall to the island nation as early as Monday. The crisis is just the latest to grip the country, which is still reeling from the assassination of its president just last month. Selena Sykes has more.
In the city of Les Cayes, rescuers' desperate search for survivors in the rubble of this local church is in vain. Further away, this mother is found in tears after finding her 7-year-old daughter's body. Southwest Haiti has suffered the worst damage from the 7.2 magnitude earthquake, which hit the Caribbean country on Saturday. The tremor was felt in the capital Port-au-Prince, 125 kilometers from the epicenter.
J'ai senti la terre bouger. J'ai regardé devant, derrière. J'ai vu que tout était en train de tomber.
Overwhelmed hospitals are struggling to treat the thousands injured, while rescue operations have been made difficult as the only route to the worst-hit areas is controlled by armed gangs.
So now we're working on establishing, a real open access road via Martissan. We also use alternative means of transport. We started using boats. We've been also using helicopters and planes.
The earthquake hit a country still reeling from political crisis after the assassination of its president last month, and one that is still recovering from a devastating earthquake which killed more than 200,000 people in 2010. The Prime Minister called for unity as he addressed the nation at a press conference.
C'est moment pour que nous tous nous mettions ensemble, pour nous gagner en plus grande unité nationale, en plus grande solidarité avec monde qui pi frappé. On oublier querelle nous yo, on oublier toute bagaille.
Haiti is now bracing itself for tropical depression Grace, which could cause mudslides and flooding.
And we wrap up this bulletin in Zambia, where veteran opposition leader Hakainde Hichilema has won the presidency. According to the country's electoral commission, Hichilema won more than 50% of the nearly 5 million votes cast, winning the election outright without having to go to a runoff. The 59-year-old businessman earned 1 million votes more than his rival, incumbent Edgar Lungu. It was the 6th time Hichilema has run for president. You're watching France 24. Stay tuned for more world news.